purity. His primary objective is to disseminate his passage as widely as possible and to assemble the largest possible body of adherents. In order to attain this objective, he goes out of his way to avoid antagonizing the authorities and is perfectly willing to come to an accommodation with Rome, even to curry favor. The early church, then, as it appears in Acts, is rent by incipient schism, the instigator of which is Paul. Paul's chief adversary is the enigmatic figure of James, the Lord's brother. It is clear that James is the acknowledged leader of the community in Jerusalem that becomes known to later tradition as the early church. For the most part, James comes across as a hardliner, though he does, if Acts is to be believed, displayed a willingness to compromise on certain points. All the evidence suggests, however, that even this modest flexibility reflects some license on the part of the author of Acts. James could not obviously have been excised from the narrative. His role, presumably, would have been too well known. In consequence, he could only be played down somewhat and portrayed as a conciliatory figure, a figure occupying a position somewhere between and the extreme hardliners. In any case, the subtext of Acts reduces itself to a clash between two powerful personalities, James and Paul. Eisenman has demonstrated that James emerges as the custodian of the original body of teaching, the exponent of doctrinal purity and rigorous adherence to the law. The last thing he would have had in mind was founding a new religion. Paul is doing precisely that. Paul's Jesus is a full-fledged God, whose biography, miracle for miracle, comes to match those of the rival deities with whom he is competing. For devotees, one sells gods, after all, of the same marketing principles that obtained for soap or pet food by James' standards, indeed by the standards of any devout Jew. This, of course, is blasphemy and apostasy, given the passions roused by such issues. The rift between James and Paul would hardly have been confined, as Acts suggests. It was to the level of civilized debate. It would have generated the king of murderous hostility that surfaces at the end of the narrative in the conflict between James and Paul. The emergence and evolution of what we call Christianity stood at a crossroads. Had the mainstream of its development conformed to James' teachings, there would have been no Christianity at all, only a particular species of Judaism which might or might not have emerged as dominant. As things transpired, however, the mainstream of the new movement gradually coalesced. During the next 3 centuries around Paul and his teachings, thus to the undoubted posthumous horror of James and his associates, an entirely new religion was indeed born, a religion which came to have less and less to do with its supposed founder.